is weird, odd, strange, or just plain bizarre is really your cup of tea, then the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast will give you that fix. Can't believe it? Well, listen for yourself as we deliver the strangest news you definitely won't find on CNN or Fox. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast.
Hello. Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Broadcast Network. I am your host, Brittany Lawrence. So like a lot of us aged millennials, the quarantine has lended to me participating in things I never would have otherwise. You guys know what I'm talking about. TikTok. I've inadvertently become obsessed with the idea of going viral. There doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason to something getting millions of views. The only thing it has to do is captivate some part of our brain. Something triggers and says, this is cool, this is fun, this is offensive. Today we are going to dive deep into past generations to look at some historical viral moments in history. Things that definitely would have broken the internet, had the internet existed. From the 1920s to today, people have been chasing that elusive fleeting fame that only quickly dying trends can bring. We're going to kick off our Weird News episode today with 3 pre-viral moments, events and people that captured the fascination of the world despite not being able to tweet about it. When was the last time you were so fed up with the world you just wanted to get away? Honestly, with the way things are going right now, that could very well be today. Here's looking at you, 2020, with your virus, death hornets, economic turmoil, and dust storms. Maybe pole sitting is for you. Maybe you need a palate cleanser, something to make you feel better about the fact that the world seems to be actively falling apart. Hey, at least the government isn't committing mass murder by poisoning your alcohol. I mean, I'm not sure if that actually makes anyone feel better, to be honest. I'm still surprised this was actually a thing that happened. Then there's bananas. In a super throwback Mario Kart style, slippery banana peels are not just for Rainbow Road. So let's get to it. Our first dive into would-be viral sensations in the 1920s. It's the pole-sitting trend. Pole-sitting is basically a test of endurance. This trend consisted of people sitting on a pole with a small platform placed at the top for the sitter. Literally, those chasing fame for this particular feat would find a pole, climb it, and perch for days, sometimes months at a time. This 20s trend was spearheaded by a stunt actor and former sailor named Alvin Shipwreck Kelly. His first record was sitting on a pole in St. Louis, Missouri for 7 days and 1 hour. He then broke his own record by sitting on a pole in Newark for 12 days, and then subsequently smashed this record in Baltimore Carlin Park by sitting on a pole for 23 days. It wasn't until 1930 that he set a world record by sitting on a flagpole on top of the Steel Pier in Atlantic City, 225 feet in the air, for 49 days and 1 hour. Kelly claimed to mostly sustain himself during these attempts with coffee and cigarettes. Along with his viral before viral accomplishments, Kelly was also a pioneer of self-marketing and the influencer lifestyle. He made a living off of endorsements, personal appearances, and books about his life. In a bid to add another level to his fame, Kelly climbed a pole on a speeding biplane flying 500 feet in the air. The New York Times reported that he didn't get around to hanging by one hand as he promised he would, which just goes to show you that honestly you cannot please everyone, especially the media. Kelly wasn't the only one attempting these harrowing feats. People around the United States from LA to Chicago were pole sitting to prove their own grit. In 1928, the juvenile sitting record was set by Avon Foreman. His sit, which is by far my favorite sit, was for 10 days, 10 hours, 10 minutes, and 10 seconds. Eventually, even Kelly's record was bested by Bill Panfield in Strawberry Point, Iowa. He sat on a pole for 51 days and 20 hours until a thunderstorm forced him down. Interestingly enough, though the trend didn't truly become popular until the 1920s, the true credit for the feat has to be given to St. Simeon Stylites, the elder of Antioch. Stylite means pillar hermit, which is honestly one of the best band names I have ever heard, but I digress. St. Simeon was a column sitter who sat on a platform on a column for 36 years. His reasoning? Honestly, he was just tired of people bothering him all the time, and he wanted to be alone. Unlike Kelly, St. Simeon required a bit more sustenance for his survival atop his pillar, so residents from the nearby village would climb up and bring him parcels of flatbread and goat's milk. It's storied he may also have had a pulley system in which he brought food up, which would lend to the whole hermit persona. According to Wikipedia, his preaching conveyed temperance and compassion, and was marked with common sense and freedom from fanaticism. To be fair, I think we could all use a bit of St. Simeon in our lives right now. He eventually passed away just as he lived, alone, on his column of solitude, the most patient hermit. Now, viral moments can be based on many things, personal accomplishments such as pole sitting, or much like what's happening right now in our current time. They can be used as a means to spread information about current events. During Prohibition, the Coolidge administration used the media to try and add credibility to its attempt at the prohibition of alcohol. Everyone knows about Prohibition, right? When the U.S. government attempted to clean up its base by ratification of the 18th Amendment, which banned the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcoholic beverages. Or, at the very least, you've seen The Untouchables? Anyways. When I was doing my research for today's show, I stumbled across a book called The Poisoner's Handbook. It's basically a true crime book detailing the birth of forensic medicine in New York, which in turn led me to an article by the same author detailing what she calls the Chemist's War. I ended up going down a massive rabbit hole with this one. I was absolutely amazed I had never heard of this before it began. It described Christmas Eve in 1926, where 83 people within 2 days dropped dead from partaking in the seasonal festivities. Poisoned alcohol. The most terrifying part of this story is not actually the fact that the alcohol was poisoned. It's who it was poisoned by. The United States government, who at the time was having no luck on limiting the sale of alcohol, despite making it illegal, decided they were going to take another route and destroy the supply itself. Not by infiltrating illegal factories or arresting producers, that really wasn't working for them, but obviously by poisoning the alcohol itself. To avoid taxation on alcohol, manufacturers were required by law to denature the industrial alcohol, which is grain alcohol with some nasty chemicals mixed in. Eventually, by the mid-1920s, the government began to notice that 60 million gallons of industrial alcohol was being stolen annually. Bootleggers would then renature the alcohol, bringing it back to a drinkable state. They used chemists to do this because obviously bootleggers were paying better than the U.S. government. To counteract this, the government began to denature their alcohol with chemicals that were much more than just foul tasting. They were deadly. We're talking kerosene, gasoline, iodine, zinc, mercury, formaldehyde, chloroform, carbolic acid, and acetone. Quick aside, when my husband and I were dating, I was painting my nails at his house and spilled a large amount of acetone on his coffee table, and it basically ate away the whole finish. I destroyed it. He still married me. Back to the poison, the Treasury Department also demanded that more methyl alcohol be added, up to 10% of the total product. This would prove to be the most deadly addition. Some estimate the total murdered to be upwards of 10,000, though these numbers are wildly disputed. The deadly Christmas Eve is well documented, however, so it wouldn't be hard to convince anyone of some pretty high death tolls. The chief medical examiner in New York at that time was an outspoken detractor of the program and called it a national experiment in extermination. Now, when I first started researching this, I couldn't help but think, Janet was right. You know Janet. All of us do. The one Facebook friend we have who believes that the government is secretly trying to kill us in varying ways, from vaccines to cell phones. From first glance, Janet may have finally had her day. In this instance, however, the government wasn't secretly poisoning people. They would literally tell the media what they were doing. I suppose in hopes that people would not risk their lives by buying possibly poisoned black market alcohol. It didn't work, and the program stayed around, killing people until Prohibition ended in 1933. There was also a similar record of something like this nearly happening in the 70s, when the government made the controversial decision to spray Mexican marijuana fields with paraquat. This was primarily intended to destroy the crops, but the government also hoped the toxins would deter smokers, because obviously it worked so well the first time. The government ultimately scrapped the plan due to public outcry. So, Janet on Facebook, you're still a little crazy, but you're not wrong. Now, if you want to stay away from things the government might inadvertently or on purpose be poisoning, we can casually head over to our next story about bananas. My brother and I were huge Mario Kart fanatics when we were growing up, as I suppose many of you were as well. However, I never actually believed that bananas could be used as a lubricant, either for revenge against our enemies or just as a casual prank. However, if there is one thing that the internet has taught me, it's that cartoons were not entirely inaccurate, because everyone is going to try it on TikTok. Hashtag slipping on a banana peel. The banana reached its full peak of usefulness on January 23, 1941 in Beaumont, Texas. The SS Cape Lookout cargo ship was launched using 3.5 tons of well-ripened bananas. This is actually true. Go online, watch the video on YouTube. It's there and it's amazing. They used the bananas to lubricate the boat's slide into the water. It was not even the first time this was done, but the SS Cape Lookout was by far the largest. Apparently, bananas were cheaper than grease. I saw a picture in the Corsicana Semi-Weekly of the workers eating some of the 7,000 pounds of bananas, and it screamed, "There has to be a better way." While researching, I was surprised to find that bananas were used in the first place, as the apparently useful fruit has a long history of maritime superstition, dating all the way back to the 1700s. Bananas were a cargo on many ill-fated ships, so much so that people began to associate them as a bad omen. Bananas also give off ethylene gas, so if a ship was carrying multiple fruits, often the fruits would spoil before they reached their destination. My favorite superstition is the one where sailors were apparently very afraid of slipping on banana peels and in an abundance of caution avoided bringing them on board. Despite all of this anti-banana boat sentiment, the slippery banana tactic worked, and the SS Cape Lookout made it out to sea. This actual method is called gravitational launching, and we still use this method today. However, it is being replaced by many other options, as the grease, which is usually used in place of fruit, ends up in the ocean and is a pollutant. Smaller ships can use a method called mechanical, which is basically lifting the vessel into the air using some sort of crane and placing it in the water. This method can go seriously awry. I definitely recommend watching some failure videos on this. It's worth it. There is also the floating out method, where basically your boat stays in the water, usually covered by a garage of some sort. This seems to be the most effective, to be sure. Then there are airbags. Honestly, I don't understand this method at all, but it seems to be pretty fun. So far, we've made our way through 3 decades of pre-internet viral sensations, and when we come back, we'll discover how many people you can really fit inside a phone booth. Spoiler alert, it's a lot. Discover just what the human limit is for bed stacking, and the ultimate regret that follows. And meet a field mouse with an unusual choice of home. Stick around, and later on in the show, I'm going to run down the top 10 most viral places you can actually visit.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Hey guys, welcome back. So far, we've dived right into the sensationalist events of the early 20th century. Pole sitting, governmental poison-laced alcohol, and the ever-slippery banana boat. It's incredible to think about all of the amazing and sometimes terrifying people that have existed and events that have transpired without us ever hearing about them. Though, when you think about it, that's how basically all of these viral videos we are so caught up on now will be. The Savage Dance, Carol Baskin. No one will ever know if she really killed her husband, and likely 100 years from now, no one will care. But at the time, when it's happening, it feels as if it's the most important cultural event, the funniest joke, the most amazing feat of brains or ability. But also, sometimes it's just silly. Phone booth stuffing, much like the pole sitting, is exactly as its name describes. It's the act of cramming as many people as possible into a phone booth. It began as a popular fad in the late 1950s. Specifically, on March 20th, 1959, students at the Durban, South Africa YMCA set a world record when 25 of them were able to squeeze at least most of their bodies into a standard upright phone booth. They ranged in height from 5'4" to 6'2". Because of course it did, at one point the phone rang. Unfortunately, no one could answer it. Now in England, the practice was called the telephone booth squash, and in an act of pure English civility, they required someone to be able to make a successful phone call once the booth was fully occupied, before they considered the attempt a success. The UK managed to cram 19 students into a single phone booth. From South Africa, the trend quickly spread to Britain, Canada, and eventually the United States. One such attempt was made by students at St. Mary's College in California. The students failed to beat the world record, despite using their crosshatch method of stacking students, but they still managed to stuff 22 people into the booth, which is no small feat. If there are any other Whovian nerds listening out there, unfortunately, it was not bigger on the inside. I couldn't help myself, guys. I'm not even sorry. The ridiculous fad was covered in newspapers and featured in newscasts across the country and had adults scratching their heads in befuddled amusement. On March 30th, 1959, Life magazine reported the competitive squeeze started to sweep the U.S., with each college playing by its own rules. Some used roomy phone cubicles in fraternity houses. Others upended booths and piled into them like boats. Others took the easier approach that permits legs to dangle on the outside. Competitors agree that the best phone boothing technique is to round up undersized undergraduates, preferably freshmen, and put them under the supervision of a tough master crammer. According to Ripley's Believe It or Not, students began to incorporate the feat into their academics. Many students tried to devise ways of fitting in more people through the application of geometry and calculus, which proves that yes, in fact, you will use all of those math classes someday. Now, 25 years after the original St. Mary's attempt, in 1985, which is subsequently when I was born, and this whole thing is making me feel very old, students reenacted the event, this time with 2 phone booths to signify the integration of women to the once all-male student body. In 2009, they held a 50th anniversary event. At this point, however, I wonder how many of the students even knew what a phone booth was. I don't know what the equivalent would be at this point, though. Maybe the world's largest Zoom call. Eventually, the world record was once again bested at Modesto Junior College when they managed to fit 34 students in a phone booth. Canada tried to come in with 40, but it turns out they were cheating and used an extra-large phone booth they put on its side. Therefore, the Canadians were the reason actual rules had to be created to legitimize the record for Guinness to take it seriously. Now, the official rules state that the specified booth has to be a standard-sized booth, and it has to remain upright. In addition, it was ruled that a person could only count if at least half their body was inside the booth. The booth stuffing trend is one of the shortest-lived trends on our list, dying out almost as quickly as it started. It began and ended in 1959, making way for Volkswagen stuffing and our next decade of shenanigans. There isn't a name for our next story, but it falls right in line with the idea that just because we can do something, it doesn't always mean we should. Students at Wakefield Technical and Art College in Yorkshire, England, as a student Rag Week stunt, endeavored to set a record for the most people in one bed. I admittedly had to look up what Rag Week was. Apparently, Rag Week is an annual event chiefly in Britain and Ireland where university students engage in unusual activities to raise money for charity. For this particular stunt, they were attempting to get to 50 people awkwardly stacked on a bed. However, when they got to 47, things began to go very wrong. Fraser Cartwright was on the bottom of the man pile, and he suddenly gasped and said, "Get off, quick, before blood began rushing from his nose, and he subsequently passed out. He was able to be rescued and survived the ordeal. When interviewed, Cartwright was quoted as saying, 4 tons of humanity were on top of me," which seems rather dramatic, but also not entirely untrue. It nearly squashed the life right out of me. I thought I was being killed. Never again. Thank you. Apparently, Fraser and 4 others volunteered to form the bottom of the layer. This is where the story gets a little weird for me. I mean, I know we have been talking about some weird stuff, but for me, this takes the cake. Why would anyone volunteer to be the bottom layer of a massive human mountain? That should be something you have to draw straws for or something. I cannot imagine being the dude that says, "Yes, that sounds like the perfect job for me." According to Fraser, as the students piled on, the iron ridge of the bedstead was pressing into his chest, making it difficult to breathe. He claimed it was the worst experience of his life. He was only 16, though, so he still had a lot of disappointment ahead of him, I am sure. My favorite quote from the whole story comes from the school principal, Mr. Alfred Buckley, who excitedly stated, "Cartwright's all right now. I'm very glad no serious harm was done. And I'm also pleased they broke the record of 42 in a bed, although I frankly don't know who set the record." I mean, sure, the kid almost died, but did you see them smash that record? I mean, people really don't change, do they? People don't change, and neither does their love for animals. The smaller, the cuter, the more mischievous, the more we love them. Enter Marty the marijuana mouse. The 70s were a weird time, and California was a hotbed for the newly declared war on drugs. Marijuana had just been classified as a gateway drug, and tensions were high. In 1974, a mouse, soon to be named Marty, made a home for himself in a confiscated box of marijuana, presumably in protest to what he must have believed to be unfair practices. The box had been stored in the evidence room of the San Jose, California police station. He would not come out. As I can imagine, he was quite happy in his home. They were eventually able to lure him out by furthering his addiction and baiting a trap with marijuana seeds. They previously tried bacon, peanut butter, cheese, and a female mouse, though it was later found that the female mouse was in fact male. Someone did not do their due diligence on that one. Not wanting munchies seems pretty strange for a mouse living in a weed house, but I digress. He was apparently transferred to a holding cage where a booking sheet was used to charge him with possession of marijuana, use of narcotics, and destruction of evidence. It's quite a rap sheet for the less than 1 pound offender. the police officers decided not to put the mouse down and instead sent him to UCLA to aid in the studies of marijuana. Dr. Ronald Seigel of UCLA's Center for Health Sciences wanted to study Marty, who appeared to show the effects of the narcotics he had been eating. Or, as Sergeant Aubrey Parrott noted, he's strung out. After this time as a scientist, Marty was returned to the police who originally found him, and he became their station mascot, living a life of leisure in a posh cage with all the food he could possibly want. They did not, however, provide the marijuana he once craved. Marty, the one-time field mouse, died at an estimated 16 months old, and the nation mourned his passing. According to his obituary, he died peacefully in his sleep at a pet clinic, where he was visiting for treatment of a stubborn skin ailment that had rendered him nearly bald. His death was ultimately attributed to old age. It is rumored that nearly 2,000 people showed up to Marty's funeral in San Francisco. Our viral journey has taken us on a ride through the absurd, from booth stuffing and bed stacking to a mouse with a penchant for that good high. And we still have 3 decades to go. The 1986 Balloon Fest started out as a bid for charity, but ended up costing them much more than they raised. And many of us still remember the Y2K scare of 1999, but it's too ridiculous not to get a nod here. And no would-be viral list is complete without a UFO sighting. When we return, we get closer to the internet, but not any farther away from the craziness of human nature and what makes us so obsessed with watching each other just live life.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
We're back and ready to jump back into the most recent decades of viral mayhem. Before the break, we jumped on the how many people can we get to do something ridiculous bandwagon and met Marty the marijuana mouse. Rest in peace, friend. I'm excited to get into some of the stories that have come together since I've been around. A 1985 baby. In 1986, the United Way of Cleveland set a world record by releasing 1.4 million balloons. The event was intended as a publicity stunt to raise money for the charity. However, the balloons drifted back over the city, Lake Erie, and landed in surrounding areas, which caused problems with traffic and a nearby airport. The disaster left the organizers and city facing lawsuits seeking millions of dollars in damages, and the event was overall a net loss. The event was spearheaded by a Los Angeles-based company called Balloon Art by Treb, and it took over 6 months of preparation to get the whole project ready. The whole structure that was built for releasing the balloons measured 250 feet by 150 feet and was over 3 stories high. They covered the structure with woven mesh material to hold the balloons in place over a corner of the public square in Cleveland. Students and volunteers spent many hours filling the balloons. They were literally supposed to have 2 million, but they gave up at 1.4. Because at that point, who really cares, right? United Way sold sponsorships to benefit their cause at the price of $1 for every 2 balloons. The day of the launch, the organizers decided to let the balloons go early in lieu of an approaching rainstorm. This will become a very important mistake later on. It's important to note that although they didn't get to 2 million balloons, the 1.4 million was still a record, and they beat out Disneyland, who had set the record the previous year for their 30th anniversary. The balloon release was quite beautiful, as it completely engulfed Terminal Tower. And, under normal circumstances, a helium-filled balloon will float long enough to fully deflate before it comes back to Earth. It's also important to note that we are also well aware now of the significant environmental damage that letting balloons go can do. Just don't do it, folks. However, due to the weather, the cool air, and the rain that collided with the balloons, they dropped to the ground fully inflated. Though it probably looked pretty cool, it caused huge issues, clogging the land and waterways of Northeast Ohio. In a tragic turn of events, 2 fishermen, Raymond Broderick and Bernard Souzier, were reported missing by their families on the day of the event. Rescuers were able to locate their boat, but the Coast Guard's search and rescue helicopter had difficulty reaching the area because of the asteroid field of balloons. A boat crew tried to locate them as well, but the balloons in the water made it impossible to see whether anyone was on the lake. The Coast Guard eventually suspended their search on September 29th, and the fishermen's bodies washed ashore. The wife of one of the men eventually sued the United Way of Cleveland and the company that organized the balloon release for $3.2 million, and eventually settled for a yet undisclosed amount. In a further insult-to-injury moment, balloons that landed in a pasture in Medina County, Ohio, spooked a herd of Arabian horses, and many of them suffered permanent injuries. Luis Nowakowski also sued the United Way for $100,000 and also settled for yet undisclosed terms. There were also many parts of the city that simply had to shut down due to the balloon blizzard. Burke Lakefront Airport had to shut down an entire runway for half an hour after balloons landed on it. There was also a myriad of traffic collisions as balloons clogged up the roads and people stopped to gawk at the gaudy display. And Canadians were less than pleased at the balloons now littering their beaches. All in all, this was one viral attempt that was a beautiful disaster. Literally, nothing could have gone worse, which is basically the exact opposite of our next story. Now, I was 14 during the Y2K debacle, so I have distinct memories of my mom hoarding water bottles and canned food in preparation for the impending fallout. With that being said, I don't actually remember being afraid. I think 14-year-old me must have had a good feeling about the whole thing. That, or my youthful optimism, was too much for impending doom to darken. The actual reasoning for the worldwide fear is kind of convoluted, but it refers to the events related to the formatting and storage of calendar dates beginning in the year 2000. So basically, they anticipated problems because most programs represented 4-digit years with only the final 2 digits, meaning that 1900 would be the same as 2000, and obviously was a sign of the apocalypse. In reality, most companies were aware of the issue and worked to get the systems upgraded to fix the anticipated problems, and very few companies actually experienced any fallout when the rollover into the new year finally happened. The acronym Y2K has been attributed to Massachusetts programmer David Eddy. There were some other names in contention: CDC, Century Date Change, and FODL, Faulty Date Logic. But according to Eddy, Y2K just came off my fingertips, which I'm glad about because honestly the other names were pretty terrible. People were really freaking out about computers not being able to recognize the difference between 1900 and 2000 and likened it to natural disaster type of emergencies. The world government set up special committees to make sure that the most critical companies were diligently working to fix their problems and to make sure their government was prepared for the supposed fallout. This wasn't really a new reality, though. In 1958, a programmer named Bob Bamir had noticed the flaw as a result of his work on genealogical software and spent the next 20 years trying to get big programmers like IBM and the actual United States government to listen to him. I don't know if the guy was still alive when it all actually went down, but I do hope he got a solid "I told you so" in. Someone owed that guy a fruit basket at the very least. Companies literally waited until the latter part of the decade to even start paying attention, and then had to scramble to figure it out. Because you see, it's not that the whole date numbers thing wouldn't have been a problem. The fact is that it probably would have been a problem had it not been able to be fixed. But in true government fashion, no one really cared until it was right on top of us, and then decided that maybe we should address it, but not before scaring everyone into taking all their money out of the bank and hoarding supplies for the impending end of the world. Now, there was some fallout from the turnover, An upscale grocer's 1997 credit card caused the crash of their 10 cash registers, reportedly due to the year 2000 expiration dates, and was the first Y2K-related lawsuit. Some software, such as the ever-important Math Blaster Episode 1, In Search of Spot, could only treat years as two-digit values and would give any given year as 1900, 1901, etc. This caused nationwide confusion and hysteria. I'm just kidding. I really don't think anyone was playing Math Blaster. But maybe that's just me. There were some dire consequences that actually stemmed from the rollover. One of the saddest took place in Sheffield, United Kingdom, when incorrect risk assessments for Down syndrome were sent to 154 pregnant women, and 2 abortions were carried out as a direct result of a Y2K bug causing miscalculation of the mother's age. Most of the flare-ups were less dire and consisted of traffic light malfunctions and bus fare machines not working. In the end, the actual fallout from the Y2K supposed disaster was minor, mostly due to the fact that companies were able to counteract the rollover issues through new programming. The real problem was the slow response time to the well-known issue. My mom could have saved a whole lot of money on bottled water had we listened to Bob, the genealogy guy. Bob may also have been smart enough to not get fooled by our next story, coming to us from Morristown, New Jersey. So basically, on January 5th, 2009, people began to see a whole bunch of red lights floating in the sky in Morristown. They also showed up on January 22nd, the 29th, February 7th, and the 17th. On the 5th, the Hanover Township Police Department started receiving the first of many 911 calls. Neighboring departments were receiving the calls as well regarding the strange lights. Then they called the airports to report possible hindrance to flying. The airport control towers reported seeing the lights, but had no idea what they were. They tried to pick them up on radar, but couldn't detect anything. Things were getting weird, and the people were here for it. Major news outlets started reporting on the phenomena, as well as less reliable UFO news sources. There were many eyewitness reports made about the lights in the sky, most of them centering around the fact that they were obviously seeing a UFO. The police decided they had to be road flares attached to balloons. No reason, they just figured that seemed more reasonable than extraterrestrial spacecraft. Although one government official disputed these claims, stating, "These things were moving fast, holding formation, and then moving in 3 different directions. I don't know what it was." Unfortunately, turns out, though, the cops were right. Eventually, 2 men came forward, known as Rudy and Russo, and they brought video evidence of them perpetuating what we now know as a hoax. They attached 5 flare lights to helium balloons and released them into the skies above Morris County, New Jersey. Sighting reports were concentrated in the towns of Hanover Township, Morristown, Morris Plains, Madison, and Florham Park. Why, though, is the real question. Basically, it was just to be jerks. On April 1st, 2009, Rudy and Russo went public, announcing that they had perpetuated this hoax to show everyone how unreliable eyewitness accounts are, along with investigators of UFOs. The reveal came in the form of an article written by the 2 men and published online by Skeptic magazine. Rudy and Russo described in detail how and why they perpetuated this hoax, and provided links to videos showing their preparations, the launch, and subsequent media coverage and involvement. They were eventually charged with wasting police resources and posing a fire and aviation threat. It carried with it a $250 fine and 50 hours of community service at the local rec center. We've now careened through the 20th century, taking a deep look at the moments where humanity sees the best and sometimes the worst of each other. I think it's honestly what the internet was really created for, to share in the blink of an eye everything we used to experience in solitude, to share in human emotion and solidify our need for interaction, even from a distance. When we come back, I'll be counting down the top 10 most viral places you can actually visit.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Hey guys, thanks for sticking around. My husband and I love to travel and have been to some super cool places. We spent our honeymoon in a treehouse in Costa Rica and have slid down some massively cool sand dunes. We haven't been to these massively cool places though, and I am seriously bummed about it. Let's count down the most viral places you've never seen. Number 10, Socotra Island in Yemen. Separated from mainland Africa more than 6 million years ago, this remote island looks like the set of a sci-fi film. Socotra's incredible and unique biodiversity means that there are plants and trees here not found anywhere else in the world. Particularly bizarre are the ancient and twisted dragon's blood tree and the bulbous bottle tree. Look them up. They're pretty neat. Number 9, the Bermuda Triangle in the North Atlantic Ocean. Long shrouded in myth and mystery, the infamous 500,000 square miles, also dubbed the Devil's Triangle, is roughly the area between Bermuda, Florida, and Puerto Rico. Although the U.S. Coast Guard disputes any such area exists, conspiracy theories thrive on stories about unusual magnetic readings and ships, planes, and people who have disappeared here without a trace. Number 8, the Nazca Lines in Peru. The animal figures and geometric shapes etched by the ancient Nazca into Peru's barren Pampa de San Jose are one of South America's great mysteries. Visible only from the air or from a metal viewing tower beside the highway, some of the unexplained shapes are up to 200 meters in length, and each one is executed in a single continuous line. Number 7, the Tianzi Mountains in China. Found in the northwest of Hunan province in China, these staggering limestone pinnacles are covered in lush greenery and often shrouded in mist. A cable car goes as far as Huangshi village, and from here there are plenty of trails to take in the breathtaking views of Tianzi, Son of Heaven. Unsurprisingly, the inspiration for the floating mountains in the blockbuster movie Avatar. Number 6, Badabi-Surt, Iran. These beautiful travertine terraces in northern Iran are an incredible natural phenomenon that developed over thousands of years. Travertine is a type of limestone formed from the calcium deposit in flowing water, and in this case, it's 2 hot springs with different mineral properties. The unusual reddish color of the terraces is down to the high content of iron oxide in one of the springs. Lake Hillier in Western Australia. This remarkable lake was discovered in 1802 on the largest of the islands in Western Australia. The lake keeps its deep pink color year-round, which some scientists say is down to high salinity combined with the presence of a salt-loving algae species known as Dunaliella salina and pink bacteria known as halobacteria. Number 4, Pamukkale, Turkey. A remarkable UNESCO World Heritage Site in southwest Turkey. A visit to Pamukkale, or the Cotton Palace, also takes in the ancient ruins of Hierapolis, the once great city that was built around it. Water cascades from natural springs and down the white travertine terraces and forms stunning thermal pools, perfect for a quick dip. Number 3, Thor's Well, Oregon. In rough conditions at Thor's Well, also known as Spouting Horn, the surf rushes into the gaping sinkhole and then shoots upwards with great force. It can be viewed by taking the Captain Cook Trail from the Cape Perpetua Scenic Area Visitor Center. But for your own safety, stay well back, especially at high tide or during winter storms. Number 2. The Giant's Causeway, Northern Ireland. 60 million years ago, a huge volcanic eruption spewed out a mass of molten basalt, which then solidified and contracted as it cooled, creating the cracks that can be seen today. There are an estimated 37,000 polygon columns at this World Heritage Site, so geometrically perfect that local legend has it they were created by a giant. And number 1, Spotted Lake, British Columbia. Spotted Lake has long been revered by the native Okanagan people, and it's easy to see why they think of it as sacred. In the summer, the water of the lake evaporates and small mineral pools are left behind, each one different in color to the next. The unique lake can be viewed on Highway 3, northwest of the small town of Osoyoos, although visitors are asked not to trespass on tribal land. And that's it. We've reached the end of our program today, and I thank you so much for sticking it out with me as we travel through all of the viral moments from the 1920s to today, and to realize that even though things were different before the internet, we're all basically the same. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you. Have a good night, and take care of each other.